So have you ever noticed how much we glorify the survival stories of one? I mean, really, if you look at the bestseller lists in any bookstore or online, if you look at movies over time that are biographical accounts of resilience, often it is one person defying the odds of nature or whatever calamity they found themselves having to live through and actually living to tell the tale. You know, some of you may know these stories. I've come across a few different books that just show the depth and breadth of the things that people have had to deal with. From When I Fell from the Sky, the story of Julian Diller, the sole survivor of a plane crash in the Peruvian rainforest. Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea with Stephen Callahan, and really his story somewhat reminds you of Tom Hanks' story with the volleyball, if you remember. Some of you, many of you in this community I know have read Unbroken by Lauren Hillenbrand, and you've seen the same movie about an unlikely Olympian qualifier that went to World War II and became a POW for many, many years. One of the movies that I thought about in preparation for this message today was based on a book called Between a Rock and a Hard Place. And it's a book about Aaron Ralston's journey in the desert, where he gets caught literally in a very small ravine between a stack of boulders, and his arm gets caught in the midst of the process. Any of you that are James Franco fans know that you've seen it probably again and again. And it is riveting because, you know, there's not very much activity. It's actually just a lot of his conversation and reckoning with himself as he continues to discern and decide what to do to ensure that he will be able to get out of this alive. And at one point, at kind of this reckoning where he's looking at the phone and taking videos for the eventual time where they would find him not living anymore and be able to see that video journey, he said this to himself: everything finally just comes together. It's me. I chose this. I chose all of this. I've been moving toward it my entire life. The minute I was born, every breath I've taken, every action has been leading me to this crack out on the surface. It was a dramatic and heart-wrenching moment. And soon after, he decided to set himself free by literally amputating his arm and then climbing for safety, only 4 hours later to be rescued by the Park Service. The reason I bring these stories up today is because I actually hope to challenge them for you and for me this morning. Challenge the obsession we have with this rugged individualism that we often glorify and count as the highest form of strength. I shared with you last week that the foundational meaning that's operative for us over this series in talking about resilience is this: it's not about becoming stronger or tougher than everybody else or defying your own strength or toughness that you expected you'd have, but instead it's about becoming stronger through becoming more flexible in life, not allowing our circumstances to bind or determine our outcomes. It's about becoming tempered, if you use the metaphor that Todd Bolsinger used in his book, Tempered Resilience, on which this series is based. The last 2 weeks, I talked about the fact that we learn resilience not from a textbook, but literally from living. It is a bodily exercise and lesson in the heat and pressure of life. And last week, we talked about the fact that the heat, in fact, the stress, the pressure that is inevitable for every single person is a part of the human condition. That heat and that pressure is, in fact, necessary to develop the resilience that is inevitable in going through these experiences of life and getting to the other side. And inevitably, that strength does emerge when we are faithful and present to what's actually happening to us, allowing ourselves vulnerably to learn from the classroom and the laboratory of life. So today we're going to talk about the fact that heating in our lives and in ourselves, being reformed, refined, remade by that fire, requires holding to something firm, holding to a strong foundation. I'm finding out that there are a couple of people in the congregation, like Mark Lee and others, that have been doing some of this forging as a hobby. And if you have, I'd love to hear more from you. Bolsinger describes this process at first glance of opening and seeing into the forge. It revealed for him an inferno of blazing fire of red and orange and yellow. There were no exact lines between the edge of the steel that he was holding and the fire that surrounded it. It was all a bright and fiery glow. And he was told by the instructor to reach your tongs in and pull out the steel and notice those colors on the steel, but quickly put it on the anvil. Don't wave it around. Definitely don't touch it. Don't try to do anything to it until it is on that anvil securely. It is the only safe place for something that is so hot and vulnerable and tender. He says, in fact, oozy, like that, in that fine line between a substance that is solid and something else. This is the moment where any person who is doing the forging would begin that gentle hammering process to begin the shaping of the steel that is, in fact, necessary. This is a countercultural message for today. You know, we think about living in a resilient way and even leading in a resilient way as being strong on our own terms, being formed by the school of hard knocks, or just having something born in us, not even made, that gives us fiber and good stock to be able to withstand whatever comes. But vulnerable living, even thriving in life, and leadership that produces fruit in some way requires relationship. Whether we want to admit it or not, none of us gets to the place where we are, particularly if we are at a place of relative abundance or effectiveness or success, whatever you would name or deem it or define it. All of these places, each of these people, each of us, if we look behind our stories, our pathways, we stand on the shoulders of giants that have helped us get to those moments. Each one of us requires some kind of relational security in a world where that security is often hard to find and always difficult to trust. Sometimes we have to remember these truths and break ourselves open beyond that hardness of heart by taking a more childlike approach to life, maybe a curious one. Ed Dodd sent me a book this past week. It's a children's book that communicates profound truths that adults would certainly understand in very simple terms. It's a book called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. And it's just a very matter-of-fact conversation between these four characters, one human, three animals, all of different sizes and different abilities, and they speak plainly into the profound truths that they've experienced. And at one point, the boy asked, "What is the bravest thing that you have ever said?" And the horse simply replies, "Help." lending yourself to the holding process, to being held, to that firm foundation, a process that some might feel like is being trapped, a process of accountability and stability that is sometimes hard to take. It does require courage. It is not only to admit our need, but also the strength and internal resolve to call out the lie that we have been taught, each of us in one way or another, in our family systems or in our work environments, in our academic settings. In one way or another, we have been taught that a leader or someone who lives well doesn't need anyone else to lead or live well alongside us. It is really one of the greatest problems of our time and one of the hardest narratives in our minds to divest ourselves of, or maybe I'm only speaking my own witness to the struggles that I have faced. You know, there are examples all over that we could point to. One of them you may know from a television show that so many people watched long ago, The Sopranos. And Tony Soprano, the main character, was obviously a rough and tumble kind of guy that had seen his share of violence, both experienced and also initiated. But Tony at one point started to grapple with this lie in his life and began to secretly go to therapy. He would tell no one around him, especially no one in his mob family, about this relationship. And you know, he went back and forth with this counselor, often fighting with her and then also fighting with himself internally about all of the things and the tensions that he was experiencing and having to overcome. But again, when I see Tony's struggle, when I see yours, when I see mine, I think of the words in that same children's book. Another animal said, very simply, receiving help is not giving up. It's only refusing to give in on your life. This whole thing of doing it on your own is an absurd expectation. To lead alone is not only absurd, but we hear this tender conversation between Moses and his father-in-law, Jethro. You can already imagine the dynamics here with the in-law thing in between. But this conversation is described in the harshest of terms in the scriptures that Kai read for us today. Jethro says very plainly, he didn't mince words, he didn't try to gloss it over to make Moses happy, even though he hadn't seen him in a long time. Jethro says, what you're doing is no good. In verse 17, this is one of the only instances in the whole Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, what we know to be the Old Testament, in which the words lo tov, not good or no good, actually appear. The other is at the beginning, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, where God says, it is not good for man to be alone. And so he creates the helpmate, not just the person that's supposed to be the lackey to come alongside, but the partner that truly will be the one that is the equal helpmate to make life thriving and grand and rich and beautiful. So we cannot lead or live alone. It is not wise or healthy or a long-term solution for thriving, Todd Bolsinger says. Coming from their sojourn in Egypt, I want to think about the big picture here of what Moses is encountering. They've come to the end of their sojourn in Egypt, returning finally to Mount Sinai, this threshold into the beginning of really building their lives as they move into Canaan, the promised land, in the time ahead. And I want us to remember that this is, of course, not the first time that he has come here. This is not the first time that he has had a holy encounter or even a challenging word here. Do you remember? Back in Exodus 3, when he first came to the holy mountain of Horeb that is also known as Sinai, this is the moment where he came and he had the theophany, the God appearance in what? The burning bush, the fire. The I am, or the I will be, the name of God that continues to give Moses his challenge, calling him, reminding him of who he is and what he is called for. This burning bush reminds us of the forger, the refiner's flame, at a time when generations had been cut off, and really the people Israel had lost so much memory of their own history and heritage. And the nation of Israel was being reborn through God's call of Moses to go and to carry out God's request for the people to be saved. This tension in the story, as both the people were losing their way and as a new king had come to power, this story of the nation's birth and thriving depended so much, not just on the rabble staying quiet, as we saw last week, but even more, it depended upon Moses' choices. Not only his judgments, and again, these judgments that he was making were not retributive justice, ones where it was an eye for an eye, those kinds of judgments. They were ones of God's law, ones that were judgments of need, providing for the most poor and the most hungry among them. Not only his judgments, but he was a few choices away from becoming the very Pharaoh that he was running from. Becoming the one who tries to hide in his leadership any kind of imperfections in the public eye, even at the expense of others, and cannot admit his own failings, finding his not knowing or lack of success being even then a posture of strength. Perhaps Moses then was the perfect choice because he was always teetering on the edge of those choices, always being received as a stranger everywhere he went, even as a baby floating, as the tale is told, in a basket down the river into the courts of the Egyptian queen. Even when he ran from that same adopted homeland as a murderer to a foreign and alien land, being received by Jethro's family in Midian and finding a family and raising it. Even then, he found himself having to be reminded of the fact that he is belonged really everywhere and nowhere. He reminded himself of that even in the naming of his own sons. Gershon, which is known as the alien or one from a foreign land, and Eleazar, which means my God, my help. Moses was always formed as steel on the anvil of human relationships that took him in. He was kept strong and indeed flexible instead of leaning to the temptation of power that would have been so easy to grab as Pharaoh did with a developed, hardened heart. Bolsinger said, "To lead alone for us is reckless and arrogant, foolish and even dangerous to both yourself and to others. To lead and live alone often results in a failure of nerve or a failure of heart, which is to squander the valuable time and energy and commitment of our followers, whoever they are, whether they be people at your work or your own children." In our world, we can see this today in all sorts of leaders and politics that have fallen from grace, clergy and business executives that have found themselves in place of financial and sexual misconduct. We can find it in any leader that for a myriad of reasons, burnout even, stops way before perhaps their time living their purpose. Being open to that holding process, these are the times. Being open to challenge, being accountable, having people around you that will call you again to what is sure and what is true. These are the practices that can ensure that we can stay true for the long haul to whatever commitments or even relationships we hold dear. So I want us to consider something that was presented in this book, and I thought it was really profound and bears out in life if only you look. To build resilience, we need relationships in 3 different places. When we think about the performance of life, both externally and internally, we need those resilient relationships, those founding relationships, stabilizing relationships on the front stage where performance happens, like staff at work or allies in any organization we're part of. If we're stay-at-home folks, then you're involved in something where you're exacting some level of influence or using your gifts. So front stage where performance happens, backstage, a place to nurture those front stage performances. That can look like maybe a coach that you have or a mentor that has been a person that has been for you and has come alongside you just naturally and informally over the years of your life. I know for me, it has looked like as a pastor, I have believed and have had a foundational discipline in my life as I lead in so many different places to always have a relationship or a space where I follow. And so for years of ministry, I have kept a very consistent relationship with a therapist so that I can also know what it means to grapple with those things of my heart and have a discipline of looking internally in my own places where I have maybe missed the mark as I continue to ask each of you to do every week. Try to hold integrity in that. And there may be other ways that you find to do that too. So front stage, backstage, and then off stage, a place to step away from the heat of living into other parts of life that bring peace and wholeness. Maybe this is your household, maybe it's not, and you find other places, friendships or other connections, chosen family or cherished friends that are that rock for you. Stephen Covey, that talks about leadership in life, says simply, we are not a product of what has happened to us in our past. We have the power of choice that can wield and influence it. The choices of who one surrounds yourself with is perhaps the greatest choice we can ever make at any age. So I know some of you that are hearing this message today, some of you are in Wesley groups in our church. Some of you have accountability groups from people all across the city or maybe even beyond the bounds of our city in different parts of the world. Some may just have that one person that is your armor bearer in life, if you will. I know in our Methodist tradition, we have a great example of being held to this anvil, this forging, this founding, being held fast to it, that Wesley showed in his own life. As he had a Wesley group of sorts known as the Holy Club, they held themselves to a long list of very piercing questions that helped them remain faithful in life and see themselves clearly for who they were. Maybe not the person that they were creating as a legend in their own mind. And these questions can be found published in 1729 and 30 in the preface to Wesley's second Oxford Diary, and you can even find them on the internet if you want to look. But these questions are ones like, Am I consciously or unconsciously creating the impression that I am better than I really am? In other words, am I a hypocrite? Another question, can I be trusted? Another question, am I self-conscious, self-pitying, or self-justifying? Did the Bible live in me today, one says? Do I insist upon doing something about which my conscience is uneasy? Do I grumble or complain constantly? Is Christ real to me? This might be a place if you have no concept of that forging foundation in your own life. Maybe these questions and inviting a partner in might be a place to begin. I want to invite you today to either begin now or revive your commitment to be willing to learn alongside others from the events and the people in your life, to show up as oozy in your relationships and vulnerable even, to let them hold you when the hammering of life begins. You know, we as a church for many years have been a part of a Habitat Methodist build. And this fall, even with a pandemic, was no different. I was there on one of the first days that the house began, where the foundation was laid and was firm, and we were just beginning to pray over that foundation and have the first nails go into the wood that would be the house's frame. And I had a chance to meet the family. It was a family that was fleeing the violence from the continent of Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And Elaine and Rose and their family of 5 children, 4 boys and 1 daughter, had come into the United States and for many years had been hoping to begin a new chapter in life by having the privilege of being in one of these homes and offering their own sweat equity to earn it. And as Elaine, on behalf of his family, welcomed everyone and gave a hearty word of thanks, he said something to the effect of, you know, everything that we have done, every decision, every chapter of life, even the hardest things that we have experienced, even the trip over the pond into this country has brought us to this very moment. And we are thankful for a new beginning because you have come to help us make it happen. And then that hammer and nail began to be drove in. I don't know about you, but what Elaine said, this family, this picture of resilience in the sweltering heat of South Louisiana, offered similar words as Aaron Ralston's journey in between those 2 rocks where he lost a limb. And it was in that crushing heat there that his situation and their situation looked extremely different. One alone and with considerable loss, and another with all to gain. As the children's story said, the horse said to the boy, "Help," is perhaps the bravest word that any of us can ever say. Who are you inviting alongside you to be reminded that the wisdom of God is often, if not always, imparted in the collective more than as the individual? Who's your Jethro that's going to lead you through today and the days to come? In Jesus' name, amen.